Hello again, this is Elizabeth, and I'm back with another accent analysis video. Last time we analysed the dialect of the late Queen Elizabeth. This time we'll look at Mr. Brian Sewell, whom The Guardian described as Britain's most famous and controversial art critic. While it is true that he sharply divided public opinion, we are not here to discuss the man or his ideas. We merely shine the spotlight on his dialect. Brian Sewell passed away in his London home on the 19th of September 2015. He was not only renowned for his pungent, waspish, rapier-sharp remarks, but also for his privileged genteel pronunciation, which made quite a few people become prickly. In his Daily Mail piece entitled Posher than the Queen, Brian Sewell argues that properly enunciated English is one of the world's glories. He points out that we English are prejudiced against everyone we perceive to be a toff, and use the term Poshism. Brian was definitely, throughout his life, subjected to this prejudice against the well-spoken. He was bullied at school because of the way he spoke. He says, quote, "What was I supposed to do? I spoke as I spoke because it was the way my parents and their circle spoke, and to adopt a form of oral camouflage by mimicking my peers at school seemed a form of betrayal and cowardice. I could not do it. I did not want to do it, and I did not." Unquote. Okay, I think that's enough background. Now, without further ado, let's just get started.
I'm Brian Sewell, an art historian best known as the art critic of the London Evening Standard. An educational pilgrimage to Rome made by young British gentlemen and aristocrats throughout the 18th century. I'm pursuing the Grand Tour. I'm pursuing the Grand Tour. We have spoken before about the decline and disappearance of ur, diphthong. Words formerly containing the diphthong ur have come increasingly to be pronounced with o instead. Thus, poor, sure, moor, cure, tourist are often po, sure, mo, cure, tourist. In an article by J.C. Wells published in 1997, he said that his survey figures for poor showed that when we group all ages together, poor was preferred over the traditional poor by a margin of 57% to 43% of the respondents. But when we look at different age groups separately, poor was preferred by only 27% of the oldest respondents, that is born before 1923, as against a massive 81% of the youngest, born since 1962. And of course it goes without saying that as British English is non-rhotic, the final R is dropped. An educational pilgrimage to Rome made by young British gentlemen and aristocrats throughout the 18th century. Educational.
Again, we have touched upon this before. Yod coalescence. English has long had a tendency to convert t into ch and d into j. Historically, words such as nature had those two consonants, t plus y, nature, but it has long ago been replaced by an affricate, nature. I, for one, still pronounce some words, such as actual, as actual, a variant that nowadays would be perceived as mannered, or rather pejoratively, as contrived. For me, perpetual and graduate have formal, extremely careful forms, so perpetual, graduate, as opposed to everyday forms, perpetual, graduate. These are all words, you'll notice, in which the new affricate is followed by a weak or unstressed vowel. Now, where I definitely draw the line is when yod coalescence widens its scope, extending now to stressed syllables. This makes Tuesday, conservatively Tuesday,
begin Tuesday, identical with choose. Tune and duke become tune, duke, and reduce comes to have a second syllable identical with juice. I like to think of the avoidance of this development as a touchstone of RP, as against estuary English, which clearly accepts it. But I wonder whether this argument still holds water.
3 centuries ago, as the Grand Tour reached its peak, as many as 40,000 young men with titles, money and connections roamed from city to city in Europe. Most bound for Italy. For Italy. For Italy.
Italy, tensing a final and prevocalic e. The final vowel in words such as happy, coffee, valley was traditionally identified with the e of bit, so happy, coffee, valley. But many speakers nowadays identify it with the e of beat. We also hear it here in city and money.
Money and city to city. City to city. Why? Dr. Johnson, as ever, had the answer. All that sets us above savages has come from the shores of the Mediterranean. Gibbon, too, he of the Decline and Fall, was sure that the Grand Tour completed the education of the gentleman and made him a better Englishman. Gosh. Why? Why?
Why? The aspirated WH sound. We recently put out a complete video dedicated to this unique feature of all upper-class accents. Nowadays, in words spelled with WH, English people of all social classes and in all parts of the country normally pronounce plain W as why, when, which, somewhere, etc., as opposed to why, when, which, somewhere. So the words whine and wine are now homophones, so they pronounce the same way. However, a few speech-conscious people make the effort to pronounce hua in these words, and they make a distinction between whine and wine. In Scotland, Ireland, and much of the United States, matters are different. Their native local accent retains hua. Sociolinguistically, hua is so uncommon as to be negligible. Ideally, it should perhaps be regarded as part of RP. J.C. Wells notes that for EFL, Jones rightly judged that it was an unnecessary complication. In other words, if you are an ESL student, you can safely ignore this feature. In fact, you can safely ignore almost everything mentioned in this video. This is purely for the dialect aficionados.
He of the Decline and Fall was sure that the Grand Tour completed the education of the gentleman, was sure the education.
Please note that education and then later sure and not sure.
Most Grand Tourists despised Italians, but were very pleased to meet each other, often forming little Westminsters. Most.
We're not going to dwell on this as we have mentioned this countless times before, the change in the quality of the goat vowel. In over the road, I don't know, etc., we now use a diphthong with a mid-central, usually unrounded starting point. A century ago, the starting point was back and rounded. Downed, road, over, etc. For a more detailed look, watch the 5 top tips video. Click up here for that video. I think it's one of the most watched videos on our channel here.
Who's your hairdresser? Well, anyway. Italian aristocrats opened palace doors for them. Craftsmen cheated them with fakes and forgeries. And willing women and lusty men instructed them in every pleasure to be had in bed.
Opened. Again a very strong pronounced goat vowel. Dr. Jeff Lindsay on YouTube notes that for King Charles, who has the same diphthong, for the king the vowel placement is further forward in the mouth. O.
For a year or so, the grand tourist followed an established route the length of Italy.
This is crazy.
He might fall ill or even die. For a year or so. For a year or so.
For a year or so. We had mostly lost that tap-tar. The alveolar tap was a usual realization of R between vowels, as in very sorry and better off. It has been replaced by the ordinary approximant R, as in really. Oh, and note that Italy as well.
Italy. The grand tour for the grand tourist in the 18th century was bloody hard work. And it's this kind of underbelly of the subject that I want to demonstrate.
Bloody. That strut vowel is very different. The open vertical setting gives it a little extra space to the shape. To make the sound yourself, sprinkle a tiny bit of R to the sound. Just make sure you don't make it too long, okay, as it should still be a short vowel. To practice it, try this with me. The dull young monks rushed in a flood to hunt the buds of the lovely buttercup. Okay. In the speech sample from Brian Sewell, you hear that in underbelly too.
Underbelly. Here was landscape of a grandeur beyond their comprehension. They came from places like Leicestershire and Lincolnshire, and they'd never seen a mountain. Grandeur.
Grandeur and not grandeur. Grandeur. You do hear that D and the yacht.
From here they were no longer their own masters. They were conducted over the mountains by peasants speaking some ungodly language with whom they could not communicate. Peasants so big, so ugly, so obviously the result of incest, goitered, swollen-eyed, buck-toothed, hang-jawed, hideous beyond belief. They seized the tourist, 6 to a man, plonked them on what they called the Alp machine, which was a kind of sedan chair on poles, and raced off up the mountain. Conducted, ugly.
Note conducted and ugly. Both the strut vowel and the final vowel in ugly, happy tensing that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago.
The tourists were terrified. 1 or 2, so terrified, slid off their Alp machines and chose to go on hands and knees up the mountain pass. Think of it, how humiliating. There you are, the son of a duke, a marquis, an earl, on your hands and knees in snow. 8 days of bitter cold, and nothing but turnip soup and rotting peaches for their dinner. Terrified.
Note all the T's. This sound is made with the tongue tip doing a light, delicate tap on the gum ridge without a splash. In other words, do not bring in or color it with an S sound. You can use the following line to practice and nail the sound. Say it with me now. Do take Dottie and Ted a better bit of butter for their tea and toast.
The grand tourist had no option but to risk the perils of the frozen peaks, and I have no option but to take the nearest tunnel. The perils, the nearest.
That tapped are in nearest and perils. I personally love it. Well, no surprise there.
And now, you are over the pass. The worst of it is done. The one thing you have learned over the last 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 days even is to look at the landscape. You've had nothing else to do. You've been very close to it. It has been all round you, with its wonders and its horrors. And it has opened your eyes instead of travelling with carriage curtains drawn You now look about you. Think on that. Nothing else to do.
Okay, let's break it up now. Do and not do. Change in the quality of oo, o. Traditionally classified as back and rounded, these vowels have lost their lip rounding, but also cease to be very back. In our assessment of the late Queen's speeches, we wondered aloud together whether the specific phoneme had changed its backward quality for her, and whether it was indicative of her gradually losing her distinct poshness, in speech at least. Well, spoiler alert, we concluded that she had changed during the course of her life, but perhaps not all that much really. We also observed that while it's striking how frightfully posh the Queen's voice was in the 1950s, the Queen's speech had become more common. I don't like that word in that sense, but for want of a better word, the Queen's speech had become more common over the decades, but there was no need to be hyperbolic about it.
And now, on to Italy.
Italy again.
And now.
And the air has opened up a lot. Listening to old film clips and recordings, we are often struck by the quality of the vowel air, previously to be heard as in that bad man, right? It was not only considerably less open than is now customary, but was also tenser and had more pharyngeal constriction. Currently, this vowel is more relaxed.
The grand tourist came down this side and found the temperature intolerably hot. Suddenly, the comparison was astonishing. They were in the warm south. There might be an odd peak still covered with snow as there is up there. There are signs of spring. The comparison.
Tapped R.
The comparison was astonishing.
The setting of this accent in the mouth is very unique. Because the face barely moves and there is a slight pout with the top lip lifted ever so slightly, with no lip spreading at all, the quality of his sh, as in ship, changes. While this is common in all upper-class accents, I personally feel this is much more marked in Brian Sewell's accent. He would say judge and not judge. I can't think of any more at the moment, but there are a lot of these words.
Dropping down from the mountains to Turin, where most grand tourists stopped for some weeks to recover from the nightmare of the Alps, the city greeted them with sun and warmth, wide streets and avenues, To young men accustomed to the crowded stews of 18th century London and the medieval streets of England's provinces, Turin's splendid modernity was quite astonishing.
Note the avenue and not avenue. And astonishing. Do you see what I mean about his sh, as in ship? Okay, I think that'll do for now. I trust you found this enlightening. Do subscribe for more refined content. Please do leave your thoughts or doubts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, do give it a like. I'll be back soon analysing somebody else's accent, or maybe shedding light on some other feature of these posh variants of Upper URP. Until our paths cross again in the digital realm, I trust that you'll take the utmost care. Talk soon. Bye for now.